Hello, everybody, and welcome back. My name is Joe Moore, CEO, co-founder at Psychedelics Today. This is a two-panel virtual conference. We're now about to kick off our second panel for the day, and it will be followed by a little bit of time in the lobby for everybody to chat with each other, get to network a little bit and discuss these ideas a little further. I want to thank Psychedelics Now, Zuber Lawler, Canadian Stock Exchange, and Psychedelic Index for being supporters of this event. Today we have Jeff Zuber, founding partner at Zuber Lawler, hosting this particular panel on Eyes on Oregon. This is one of my favorite topics. I've been dedicating a ton of time with fellow or panelist here, Jon Dennis. Do a show every other week. We're probably going to have another bunch of media coming on this topic as well. So really excited to dig into this really wild and novel legal development here. So Jeff, I'll let you take it from here. Thanks for hosting.
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate the introduction. Again, I'm Jeff Zuber. I'm a founder of Zuber Lawler, one of the most selective law firms in the United States. Represents clients throughout the world from offices all over the United States. We've represented leading plant medicine companies since 2006, and we practice the cutting edge of psychedelics law, in addition to various other frontiers, Bitcoin, cannabis, etc. We're uniquely situated to manage the psychedelics IPOs, M&A and other deals, intellectual property, FDA and other regulatory work, and litigation. The firm's attorney roster includes bioscience PhDs and engineers, a literal former rocket scientist, so we understand the science as well as the business of psychedelics. I'm also a founder of the magazine Psychedelia, the psychedelics industry leading magazine. We're partners with Microdose in this endeavor. You probably likely know them. They put on Wonderland, the industry leading annual psychedelics conference every year. You may also know my brother, Tom Zuber, who's co-founder and managing partner of our firm and also a board member of Psychedelics Today. And he is also a member of the Psychedelic Medicine Coalition, the industry's leading lobbying organization. I also like to introduce our panelists today. First, Jon Dennis is an entrepreneur in the psychedelics ecosystem, a consultant, and an Oregon lawyer. Jon assists early movers in the psychedelic space with decision-making in light of the current and emerging opportunities in the United States and international markets, with particular focus on psilocybin businesses in Oregon. Prior to joining Psychedelics Now, Jon worked as a civil litigator and managed a nonprofit law office giving free legal assistance to people living in poverty. He began working in psychedelics while volunteering for the campaign to legalize psilocybin therapy in Oregon. Jon has a BA in religious studies from the University of Kansas and a law degree from Lewis and Clark Law School. He lives in Ontario, Oregon. Pilar Hernandez is a professor in the Marriage, Couple, and Family Therapy program at Lewis and Clark Graduate School of Education and Counseling. She is a licensed family therapist and a licensed clinical professional counselor, a clinical member and approved supervisor of the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy, and approved clinical supervisor in the state of Oregon. Pilar has over 25 years of experience working with individuals, couples, and families in outpatient clinics and in private practice. Her work on decolonization and mental health integrates indigenous and Western approaches to healing. She was born and raised in Colombia, South America, where she keeps close links with indigenous networks and teachings. She has been walking a plant medicine path in Colombia with her indigenous mentor for 14 years. Pilar is a member of the Equity Subcommittee of the Oregon Psilocybin Advisory Board. She was the Equity Subcommittee liaison to the Training Subcommittee and participated in the Training Rule Advisory Committee. Pilar is involved in the creation and development of psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy preparation program with continuing education at Lewis and Clark College and a psilocybin-assisted therapy certification for all community members with Earth Medicine Center. Earth Medicine Center seeks to train earth medicine facilitators who practice with reverence for the sacred, in reciprocity for all beings, and deep regard for relational ethics. Next is Tom Eckert, who many of you have probably already heard of. Tom was the architect of Oregon's Measure 109, the Psilocybin Services Act, and with his late wife, Sherry, helped guide the historic campaign to establish Oregon's statewide psilocybin services program. He recently was the chair of Oregon's governor-appointed Psilocybin Advisory Board to the Oregon Health Authority. He has also spearheaded InterTrek, an Oregon-focused psilocybin facilitator training program, and the Sherry Eckert Foundation, which supports equitable access to psilocybin training and services. Tom is also a seasoned psychotherapist with a history in private practice and program development. And finally, our very own Lizzie Fanckboner. Lizzie is an attorney and focuses on cannabis matters. She has extensive experience with cannabis deals, licensing, and regulatory compliance. She earned her BA from Colorado State University and her BS from Arizona State University and JD from the University of Denver College of Law. And those are our panelists. Hello, and thank you very much for enlightening us today on this fascinating issue. I'm going to open it up right now, and I'm going to start with, let's start with Tom. I want to ask him generally about 109. You're the architect of it. Can you actually, excuse me, this question is for Dennis. Dennis, let's kick things off with you. We'll get to Tom in a second. What is Measure 109 and what isn't it?
Well, thank you, Jeff. Thank you for having me here. I'm sure Tom and probably everyone here will have a lot to say on this topic, but yeah. Measure 109 in my reading as a lawyer is kind of I think of it as a flexible legal framework for people to take psilocybin in a licensed and supported or supervised setting. I think during the campaign to legalize psilocybin and pass Measure 109, there was kind of an effort to brand it as psilocybin therapy. And Tom, I'm sure you could probably speak to this more effectively than I could, but my understanding is that there was kind of a strategic political decision made early in the campaign to brand it as therapy, in part because of polling data that showed that really was a messaging that resonated with voters and was kind of a way to articulate the potential benefits of psilocybin in a way that had resonance and was understandable. But the measure itself isn't expressly therapeutic in nature. It doesn't require people to have advanced degrees, and it doesn't call the people who offer or oversee psilocybin, it doesn't call them therapists, it calls them facilitators, and it doesn't require medical diagnoses. And, the only barrier to entry for a facilitator is a high school diploma. So I think a lot of, plus graduation from an approved training program. They're passing a test and things like that. But in general, I think there's kind of, I think Measure 109 is kind of undergoing what I've been calling a reputational makeover. Instead of it being psilocybin therapy per se, more of a supervised and supported adult use program that would happen on site at a physical location, not a take home model, but you go to a site and work with the facilitator, get screened, kind of go through some preparation, and then you're, kind of be able to take psilocybin, assuming you and the facilitator can reach agreement on some kind of basic pieces. So I'd turn that over to other people and see if there's other comment on what exactly Measure 109 is. Oh, and I think you're on mute, Jeff.
That is correct. Still getting used to it. It's amazing. All I was saying is, Tom, why don't you jump in?
Yeah, sure. Measure 109 is an integrated platform. I think we get a little bit confused. It's a nuanced platform, so it doesn't surprise me that there's some confusion around these questions. But it's not binary. There's a platform that's been developed here in Oregon that's based on its own licensing system, and that's puts it in a interesting kind of revolutionary category. Even before you get to psychedelics, we're developing a mental health oriented program that's based on its own licensing system, plays well with other systems, other licenses, but to become a licensed facilitator, you will be trained specifically in psilocybin services. Now, therapists, of course, can get that training and add it to their own credentialing. And so in that sense, therapists who take this track will be able to, render therapeutic services. Although the psilocybin sequence that is kind of outlined in the regulations is its own thing, but it can be contextualized in a therapeutic context, and we hope it will be. And certainly there's a lot of clinical applications for psilocybin services. It's also a wellness program in the sense that there is no diagnosis required to access these services. That is not to say that people can't access these services for specific reasons and see specific facilitators that are equipped to work with different clinical presentations, but that's not the entire story, right? So what we wanted to do was create a platform that addresses a variety of concerns, whether it's prevention or wellness to therapy and medicine. So that leaves us with a lot to sort out. It's a challenging model to bring this above ground based on values of access and practice norms and safety and ethics, and to bring this forward in such a way that it can reach as many people as can safely benefit. So when we get into this conversation about what it is and what it isn't, well, it's a lot of different things. And there's along that continuum, there's different possibilities. And so the challenge of developing the rules and moving the program forward is partly about sorting out those different possibilities and ensuring that everyone who may safely access these services can do so along a spectrum of concerns, even if that concern is just self-exploration and wellness. So that's the idea. It's basically carving out a new space in the culture for psilocybin and psychedelic-assisted services and therapy, and doing so by putting it on its own foundation, essentially. And that's what the voters voted for, was to carve out this space, create a new licensing system and a program that creates access and isn't kind of beholden to a psychiatric or pharma-driven model, but at its heart is based on safety standards, practice standards, and ethical standards. So that comes down to training, comes down to licensure, accountability through regulation, and competency. So that's what we're doing in Oregon. It's a big project, and that's the way we laid it out, because we did want to move something forward that didn't just kind of get co-opted into existing systems, but stands on its own and can evolve intelligently and hopefully spread through the country as a model. We think of it as the Oregon model based on access and competency. So lots to talk about in there, but that's the general framework, the way I see it.
Thank you, Tom. And by the way, we have carved out here certain things with regard to Pilar is going to tackle certain things and Lizzie's, but please feel free to jump in if you do have something to say on something we're covering. Tom, and again, given you're the architect, how do you suppose we measure success of this program? If you can sort of prophesy for us how that would look.
Yeah, what a great question. I'm kind of focused on like success in the rollout phase. We could probably have a bigger conversation as to like down the road in the future what full success looks like. But so we're in this two-year development phase that was written into the initiative, and that was smart to like create space for the program to actually develop. Those involved in helping with that know that there's a lot to work through, and it's actually 2 years is tight. But as we do that and think about rolling out in 2023, so on January 1st of 2023, applications will open up for people who want to become facilitators or service centers. And then early 2023, mid 2023, we'll actually see services hitting the ground, licensed people developing service centers and rendering services. Now, there's going to be a really big demand. I mean, it's a little difficult to predict the ecosystem in terms of, as a brand new thing, but it appears that there'll be a lot of demand. So I'm not sure that success rolling out is meeting all the demand. Of course, we don't want to be flat-footed. We want to come out, with a strong program. But I think more importantly is that the rollout is balanced and equitable and really competent. So in other words, I'd like to see model programs that meet the needs in a representational way across Oregon, whether it's demographics, geographically, meeting the needs of different populations, including clinical kind of populations. Like I'd love to see a model program that's addressing palliative care and a model program that's addressing these different areas. And if we have a balanced rollout that may be modest, but it's balanced and it's seeded to grow and showing what can be done and creating good narratives and moving healing to the people who need it, then I think that will, evolve in a healthy way. So that's my hope, is that we can come out of the gate with kind of model programs and a diverse practitioner base that is meeting the needs across Oregon and kind of checking these different areas and communities that where it can be really helpful. And I think that has the result of obviously bringing healing to folks, but also creating narratives for the rest of the country, where, as I think the name of this podcast is Eyes on Oregon, and that's true. There's a lot of eyes on Oregon. So getting that right is super, super important.
Yeah, it can be a little daunting to be on center court, knowing everyone's watching. Before we go into the social equity issues with Pilar, can you just tell us a little bit about the inspiration of Measure 109?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we started, Sheree and I, my late great wife who passed away in December of 2020. She and I were 100% partners in blueprinting and moving this and advancing the campaign. And we started that process way back in 2015, believe it or not, always with eyes on 2020. We set out right from the beginning to do a ballot initiative in 2020. The horizon back then was quite different than it is now. People did not expect that any of this was possible. I think we were able to see that the science would continue to develop and that public opinion would evolve. There was some science coming from Johns Hopkins and UCLA and Imperial College of London and a few other places back then that was really powerful stuff. I personally, come from a clinical background, went to school way back in the 90s and was a bit disillusioned by kind of the drift of psychology and psychiatry toward kind of a pharma-driven model, insurance-driven model. More oriented in a humanistic kind of existential, psycho-spiritual type way. So it was always an issue for me that things seem to be moving not a complete direction, let's put it that way. The status quo was not meeting the needs in mental health care, and that's borne out in the data. I mean, Oregon is always behind the ball in terms of mental health care. We often rank kind of at the bottom of the list in terms of meeting the needs of mental health populations. So, we wanted to end prohibition and take a chunk out of that in terms of kind of bringing psychedelics above ground and bringing the underground into a place where they could practice. But we also thought really carefully about how to do it, like how to integrate psychedelics back in the culture. And that's where all this thought around an integrated platform comes from and what it means to kind of carve that space out. So we gave that a lot of thought. The first year we spent writing the initiative itself, and which was, you just thought it through and you try to create a self-consistent model. This did not exist yet. And I think we did a pretty good job on that. Obviously picked up along the way a lot of expertise and folks that wanted to support. And then, long story, but we, kept advancing. It was very humble in the beginning. We just went around the state and talked to folks, got in front of audiences, and then support started to come our way and it started to scale up. And we it became a conversation in Oregon, and ultimately 1.3 million people voted yes for psilocybin therapy, 56% of the vote. And that's exciting, and that's really good news for this movement and for the country. And yeah, now we're focused on bringing that out and implementing this vision we had way back when.
Thanks, Tom. Pilar, let's cut over to you and let's get into the social equity issue. Can you share your thoughts in regard to how equity is being integrated into the implementation of Measure 109?
Mm-hmm. Sure, thank you. Thank you, Tom and John, for the context that you offered. The implementation has a lot of opportunities and challenges. And this effort has brought a lot of people who are not visible to be more visible in this space, or just simply to be visible in this space. And I'm one of those people. And I applaud the effort and the work that everybody is doing and has done on this. It has not been so easy and smooth. It's interesting and also challenging. So one of the things that the OHA, the Oregon Health Authority, and has created was a number of committees within the advisory board. And one of those subcommittees is the Equity Subcommittee. This subcommittee has as one of its functions to offer recommendations about how to create equity in the licensing, in the service, in the training of facilitators. And members of the subcommittee are also liaisons with all the other subcommittees. And I think that having a seat at the table for us is very important, and also having a seat at the table in a way in which we can be heard. One of the most important recommendations that we have made involves asking OHA to hold licensees, whether in products, in training, or in providing services and being a service center, to have an equity plan. Not simply to talk about equity, but actually to show and be accountable to how they are doing it. We're hopeful that in that way we can embed a measure of accountability, of real accountability, that is commensurate with the size of people's businesses and their capacity, but that really speaks about a plan, the activities, a way in which you will evaluate equity, the successes, the challenges, assessment of internal, external impact, future plans, and opportunities for policy and regulation changes. And we think that if we come together to make these practices transparent, we can actually offer our state and potentially the rest of the country a way in which equity is not an afterthought or an add-on, but actually something that is integrated in everything we do. And like Tom said, it needs to be really contextual. It has to address the needs of people in different parts of Oregon, because our demographics are different, very different in different places. So that's the idea, that each center, each product facility, each service center, each facilitator in a different place in Oregon would look at their social context and see in what way I can contribute to be inclusive, and especially to create a more level field for the communities and the people who come from marginalized locations.
Thank you, Pilar. What are oversights that need to be addressed by the OHA, the Oregon Health Authority, in the current state of the advisory and rulemaking process?
Well, I have a few thoughts to share, and I invite my colleagues to add on or comment, of course. One of the things that hopefully will be added, and we have provided feedback, is to include in training and in service for all facilitators the theme of end of life. So initially, this was something that was not included, that it needs to be included. End of life is part of life. It's part of the cycle of life. We all face that, and we actually face ends of lives at different points in our lives until, you know, our final crossing. So I'm hopeful this is going to be included in the training for all facilitators so that everybody can have the possibility of serving in that capacity. The other two things that I want to highlight is that there needs to be a space, a separate space and guidelines for religious and spiritual practitioners and traditional practitioners. There is a lot of people who cannot practice within the framework, the clinical framework that we have developed so far. If you actually look at who has a seat at the table, there are no traditional practitioners there. There's no spiritual practitioners there. So there is no voice there, actually. There was no voice there actually providing the recommendations. And frankly, to me, you know, the way we have developed what has been developed, it starts from a place that it's still very Western and still very clinical. And there needs to be a space for people who can start talking about this from their own logic, which is not exactly the same. There should be bridges, there should be collaboration, but what are we going to do with those spaces that are also needed for people who want to have a relationship with psilocybin on a spiritual base? And the third thing that I like to highlight is really, I think the protections for Oregonian businesses need to be tighter. The measure states some protections for Oregonians, but there really needs to be very clear protections so that Oregonians can start their businesses and grow them locally before people from other states or other countries come and create big businesses here, because the field is not level for everybody. So there has to be some way in which there is accountability for, let's say, the bigger business to give more, so that the smaller businesses who are producing psilocybin, trying to create service centers and training programs have a chance here.
Yeah, I want to thank you, Pilar, for inviting other comment on this. A friend of mine recently pointed out to me that it's really unfair when we only defer to people of color for comment on equity, and that that's not just an issue that affects it affects us all, and it's really all of our responsibility to speak about equity and equitable access. So thank you for invitation to speak on that as well. I think one of the biggest equity concerns I have right now with the implementation of Measure 109 is that the services are slated to be really cost prohibitive to a very large number of people. It's 13% of Oregon lives at or below the poverty level, which means for a household size of 1, that's less than $13,000 a year. For a household size of 4, that's less than $27,000 a year. That 13% of Oregonians, or close to 600,000 people, are currently living at. And the projections that I've made for the cost of psilocybin services in Oregon are not going to be available or anything close to available to people who are really living along those lines. And so one of the kind of opportunities to drive the costs down is to create, in my view, kind of a special kind of set of privileges that attach to kind of more community-oriented use of psilocybin. So I think of it as more of a horizontal model that would create room for culturally sensitive and culturally appropriate practices that involve religious practices or spiritual practices. And I really like how you, Pilar, talk about different ways of knowing and different kind of ways of interacting or having different relationships with psilocybin, and the proposal to protect religious activity and under the measure is one that I think really has kind of a unique and really valuable opportunity to drive the cost down to something that's actually affordable to people by getting rid of regulations that aren't specifically borne out by actual safety concerns that are like valid. We all have safety concerns, but the question is, how do we not exaggerate those to the point where we have a system that's based on concerns that haven't materialized very often or very frequently, while still holding accountability, still holding practitioners accountable and providing oversight to ensure that the program is administered in a safe way that results in the most harm and the least amount of harm and the most amount of good. So.
Thank you, Pilar and Jon, and both of you touched on some of the issues that were being raised in the comments here. Some very good comments, and feel free to address them. But some very good issues with regard to consideration of religious and traditional medicine, something that is very well suited, that type of advice, very well suited for someone like me that was so rigidly brought up in Western education and Western medicine, and I didn't really have an appreciation for the traditional practice and how safe it's been and how fulfilling it is, something that just generally, I wasn't programmed to think of things that way. And it's just eye-opening when you learn what's actually going on. Jon, you also touched on something, one of my questions you got to, the religious implications of Measure 109, so thank you for that. I have another question for you, Pilar. Why and how shall we ensure that there is diversity in training and practice? Well, you've actually already touched on that as well, but do you have anything to add with regard to that? How shall we ensure that there's diversity in training and practice?
What I would add to that is that hopefully we can all contribute to creating equity plans and to creating accountability, where speaking to ourselves and being accountable, being the checkers for ourselves. There is other people, community, who is actually involved in providing feedback about how we're doing. In that sense, like what Jon was saying, this should be more of a horizontal model where, considering the context and where people are working, we work on what is possible in terms of accountability so that all the privilege we have is used in a positive way. It's used in a way that serves, that creates relationship, and that what he was saying, the spirit of this measure is to take us out of these medical models of insurance and all these ways in which sometimes many of us, but we open spaces for creating services and relationships that really take into account the relationship. Not only the people who, let's say, have the medicine, but also those who are involved in receiving that medicine. We have to think about what's our impact. What is the impact of big companies coming to Oregon? What is the impact of helping and fostering a lot of local communities creating their own service centers. What would happen if we have the possibility of creating a small service centers, community-led small service centers in different parts of Oregon? This will actually serve communities, I think, in a much better way. It will respond to their needs. And what would happen is this collaboration with other people who have other expertise and have other products to share. But it has to be done with an eye of how can we use privilege in a positive way, in a way that creates right relationship, that creates balance for everybody. So one aspect of Oregon, and Oregon leading the way, is that Oregon is a state where the majority of the population is white, and it's the big majority. I think it's the third state with the white majority population. So that is something that it's really important in regards to equity and privilege, because we don't have enough voices of people who belong to racial minority groups to actually inform in what ways this could be done, this could be implemented. And a voice that hasn't been present in all these, for example, is the voice of the First Nations peoples. So we have responsibility with all this privilege to actually make right. And that means more work in terms of involving people, more work in terms of providing access and opportunity, more work in terms of providing opportunities for equity. So I think that these equity plans are a good start, and we have to go beyond that. And I'm wondering if any of the other panelists have any thoughts on this.
Yeah, it's the challenge, isn't it? This program is based on values of access and safety. And so achieving both of those is what we're trying to do. And by access, I mean equitable representative access across the state of Oregon, meeting all the needs out there. Yeah, I mean, there's the policy level side and how we can kind of have an equitable access overlay on how things move through the Oregon Health Authority. And there's lots of attention on that, which is great. It's challenging to figure out what the best how to keep that lens and how to actually operationalize that lens, through policy development. And then there's the infrastructure private sector side, right? So creating norms within the communities that are doing this work and inclusivity as these businesses develop and as these organizations develop. Without insurance, without coverage, it's challenging. The question of affordability is right there. So how do we bring people above ground so they can make a living doing what they do? Or are there other models that we can work into the framework that create access? And how do we do that? So, these are really important questions. I'll plug a project that's really near and dear to my heart. We started the Cherie Eckert Foundation. My late wife spoke eloquently about creating access for all Oregonians. She came from a rather traumatic background and has had a lot to say about ensuring diversity and inclusion, not only with service provision, but starting with the practitioner base, which I think is super important, because if we have a diverse practitioner base, then these folks go back into their communities and create a comfort level with this program as a whole. And I think that's an important aspect of this. Is there's an education piece, there's a comfort level, there's a mobilizing community leaders piece, so that everyone kind of understands what this program is and that it can be part of the fabric of different communities throughout Oregon. and have those voices kind of leading the way with regard to what that looks like in communities around Oregon. The Sri Eckert Foundation is raising funds to develop scholarships for practitioner training. That's the first project, such that there's a diverse and representational base of practitioners, that especially in this first cohort. And, that's supporting folks getting training, but it's also kind of providing support for moving into the professional community. Those discussions and how best to do that are really rich. And I really appreciate all the attention that's brought to these issues and how we're going to do this. So yeah, there's this, I think the equity subcommittee as an oversight committee of sorts, kind of liaisoning with all the other committees, not having it separate, but like having it as the lens through which all the committees work through is important. And then we want to think through things on an infrastructure level and a private sector level. How do we work together to ensure that our values are actually manifested throughout the state of Oregon?
Thank you, Tom. And thank you for sharing that. And certainly, if you can put something in the chat with regard to anyone who wants to get interested in assisting in that endeavor, if they could follow up with you. I'd like to shift gears a little bit here and move over to some business considerations. And so now I'm going to turn to Lizzie. Hello, Lizzie. What might be some of the general business considerations or hurdles related to the psilocybin businesses in Oregon? And we're talking about taxes, banking, leasing property, all those things that you have to do to get these businesses off the ground.
Right. Thanks, Jeff. I'm happy to be here and on this panel, joining the conversation with my fellow exceptional panelists. And I do appreciate hearing their input. I think that background is really important, in hearing about the goals of the measure and what it's going to look like, hopefully. Some of the things that I wanted to just touch on are some of the salient issues that I think will face the psilocybin industry in general. Of course, in Oregon, to start off with. And this is really based on my experience advising clients in the cannabis space, as both cannabis and psilocybin are listed on Schedule I of the Controlled Substances Act. So based on the fact that both substances are considered federally illegal, two of the major issues that we see are taxes and banking. So I think that, while I'm not a CPA or a tax attorney, 280E in the Internal Revenue Code has been a thorn in the cannabis industry side for since its inception, and until something else changes. So I think that that will also be relevant for psilocybin businesses. Basically, just as a bit of background, 280E states in sum that no deduction or credit is allowed in running a business that consists of trafficking a controlled substance. So trafficking is not really defined by the Internal Revenue Code. Rather, the case law that's come of 280E has defined it to mean something as general as engaging in commercial activity or buying and selling regularly. So, I think that 280E will definitely be a significant tax consideration for businesses that are interested in joining the psilocybin industry in Oregon. The results of 280E are actually higher taxable income and therefore, unfortunately, higher taxes. So while I don't have a fix-all solution to share, I guess a good recommendation would be to ensure that the businesses out there can find a CPA that has experience in 280E. So someone that knows this tax code and how to make sure that the business is taking their deductions in compliance with 280E. Another big consideration is banking. So it's unclear when banks will open their doors to psilocybin businesses. It did take some time for banks or financial institutions, rather, in general, to open their doors to cannabis businesses. And I understand that both of these industries are very different. The psilocybin specifically in Oregon with Measure 109 and cannabis in general, but being that both deal with a federally illegal substance, I think that the issues that have faced the cannabis industry and that the businesses in the cannabis industry continue to face will also be present in Oregon for the psilocybin businesses. So specifically for banking, cannabis businesses that do have access to financial institutions, it sort of came about by a guidance that was issued by FinCEN, which is the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, in 2014. And this basically outlined expectations for the financial institutions that were hoping to provide services to a marijuana-related business. So there was some guidance on red flags and how to open accounts and what you're requiring from these businesses, et cetera, fairly detailed. And this was to ensure that the financial institutions were still complying with their obligations under the Bank Secrecy Act. So one thing to note here is that this guidance was directed towards marijuana-related businesses. And at this time, there is no such similar guidance or memo related to psilocybin. So I don't think there's clear direction on how these businesses will be able to bank. But I do think that it's going to be something that is they will face, and it will, might be a cash industry to start with, as cannabis was. And then quickly to touch base on forms of payment as we're talking about banking, only because Visa recently put out a memo about using cards, and it's how will they accept payment? How will these businesses accept, is it cash only? Will they be able to accept cards? Probably not at the beginning. Visa and MasterCard have made it quite clear that they do not support federally illegal cannabis transactions. So likely, I think that they won't support federally illegal psilocybin transactions. So that's just another consideration. A couple other things just to touch briefly on would be leasing commercial property and whether a landlord might be reluctant to lease to a tenant who is engaging in an activity that's federally illegal, and what kind of protections the landlord's going to want in such a lease. And there's considerations related to contract enforcement. For instance, whether a court would enforce contracts that involve federally illegal substances, which is something that the cannabis industry has faced. And also there may be potential issues around getting insurance for the business. But again, I do appreciate and understand that the future industry in Oregon is different and structured different than cannabis. And it's just the mere fact that both are federally illegal create barriers, I think, for the two industries that are similar.
Thank you very much. And my next question was, how are they different? How is the emerging psilocybin industry going to be different from the cannabis industry? And I know you were touching on that a little bit. Do you have anything to add? We are running out of time, so I'm trying to move it along.
Sure, I'll be really quick on this one. I think just structurally, they're different. As the panelists have described, the intent and the idea behind Measure 1 is very different, I think, structurally than what we see in the cannabis industry, where you can, stroll down the street and stroll into a dispensary with a valid ID showing you're over 21 and purchase some adult use marijuana to then consume later as you wish. But in Oregon, the idea is, that the psilocybin consumption will take place at a service center and in the presence of a licensed facilitator. So it's more of a, consumption in a supportive setting or, a facilitated psilocybin experience. So, and as Jon mentioned earlier, it's not really the take-home method. So it's different for the consumer, and it has a different, I think the purpose behind it maybe is a bit different than at least the adult use. I think there might be some similarities, of course, with the medical marijuana, but we could have a whole panel on that one. So I'll just end it there.
Thank you. And finally, with regard to the business aspects, a company wanting to start up a psilocybin business in Oregon, what are some of the best practices for preparing a license application?
I'll point out that there is a residency requirement. It was noted earlier that, businesses coming into Oregon and kind of navigating and negotiating what that looks like. There's a 50% ownership requirement that a business entity has to be based in Oregon. So there's that piece. That was trying to strike that balance between we want, to give Oregonians a chance to create this program, but we're not necessarily wanting to block people out either. I think, we're looking to create a community-based network of practitioners and service centers. This isn't a big corporate kind of thing. I think that people get a little confused, like on the product side. I don't see that as necessarily a big market business. We're just trying to meet a relatively circumscribed need to have simple products that work for the services that are going to be rendered in these licensed centers. I think the service side market is really interesting for the reasons we've stated, because that's where we do want sort of creativity, in the sense that we're trying to meet a lot of different potentials and possibilities and meet the needs of a lot of different folks. So on that service center side, I think there's a lot of interesting potentials. This is not a purely clinical program, like we've said. So there's flexibility built into this measure, such that every service center will be centered in safety and practice standards and ethics, but it can look like a lot of different things and meet a lot of different needs, and at a lot of different price points too. I think there's focus on some of the more expensive services, but I fully intend to see and support different centers, urban centers, that are doing everything we can to create accessible and affordable services. I think that service side market is really interesting and open to creative thought, as long as there's a grounding in safety and ethics and good practice. And that's what we're trying to do.
Tom, I'd be curious to get your take. I don't know if you had a chance to review the entheogenic practitioner proposal, but if you'd be curious to get your take on that.
Not thoroughly. So I won't comment too much, but I think the values I'm setting forth is kind of what leads my way in evaluating anything, which is that, does it support access and safety, and does it do it in that kind of way that's well balanced? I don't think the safety piece can be kind of put to the side in relation to creating access. I think we've got to find ways to do them both. But if that's possible, then that's something that I would support.
Yeah, thanks.
And we're almost out of time here, Jon, but since you raised the issue, could you share with us your thoughts on reviewing it, if you had a chance to review it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I have reviewed it. I actually drafted the current proposal, and it's been endorsed now by 2 different subcommittees at the advisory board level. The equity subcommittee voted on it last week, 11-0, to recommend adopting it, and then licensing. Thank you, Mason Marks, for his leadership in that committee, getting it adopted or recommended by a vote of 4-1 there. And the idea is that, when Oregon is wrestling with the issue of religious practice under Measure 109, there's already a robust federal landscape where those protections have already been identified and protected by unanimous national bipartisan consent back in 1993, when we passed the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which was a direct legislative overturn and rebuke the Oregon v. Smith decision, which allowed both the Oregon Supreme Court and the federal Supreme Court to discriminate against people who practice religions where their practice involves use of a Schedule I substance, such as peyote or ayahuasca or psilocybin. So the idea there was to create some room for, like as Pilar mentioned, different kind of ways of thinking, different modes of healing, and different kind of spiritual applications of psilocybin. So it's an attempt to create kind of a community container for psilocybin to be used in a kind of a culturally sensitive and respectful manner. And just in super short, the couple of key pieces of that involve a community's ability to handle its own sacrament in ways that are respectful and also consistent with the view that many communities have, which is that psilocybin mushrooms aren't just like bottles of aspirin. They're a different type of some people view them as sacred objects, sacramental objects that need to be handled with great care and respect. So it gives communities, one of the main linchpins of it is it gives communities the ability to kind of grow their own psilocybin mushrooms at their site, at their service center. So that's it in the 30-second pitch.
Yes, and I actually think we're out of time. Listen, thank you for all the comments. I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to go through them, but I do believe that we are going to have an opportunity for those speakers who have time to stay with us to do a round table and similar to what we were doing before, if some of you took part in that, and to be able to talk with each other and ask questions and exchange ideas. I'm not sure if Joe is with us, but I do think there he is. I do think we're just about out of time. Listen, thank you so much to all of you for jumping on and teaching me and hopefully all of our audience a lot about what's going on in Oregon. Very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Wonderful time here. Thank you to everybody on the panel. I want to thank Zuber Lawler, Psychedelic Index, the Canadian Stock Exchange, Psychedelic Now for supporting this event. Thank you all for attending and speaking. And yeah, we'll have about 30 minutes left in our round tables to hang out and discuss and unpack. So feel free to join us there. If you have problems with that, just enter some messages in the chat and we'll help you. We have our Vital Psychedelic Training sales ongoing. So if you're interested in that program, vitalpsychedelictraining.com, really massive 12-month training program that's revolutionary in a lot of ways. So thank you, everybody, and we'll see you in the rooms.